The words stared back at me from the screen, stark white against the glowing rectangle held tight in my hand. My thumbs, usually so quick and careless, felt clumsy, heavy. I read them again. And again. The air in the room, a moment before comfortably warm, turned instantly frigid, stealing the breath right out of my lungs. He'd meant it for her, of course. A quick message, probably sent without a second thought, late at night when he felt most untouchable. A confirmation of their little conspiracy, a shared laugh at my expense. But his phone, left on the kitchen counter while he grabbed a forgotten work bag, had buzzed with a notification. And my world had stopped. The message wasn't particularly creative, not cruel in a theatrical way. Just brutally, casually dismissive. A line in a conversation about me, a line he'd typed out, a line that perfectly encapsulated his contempt. "Don't worry about her," it said. "She can't hurt me now." The mundane cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not anger, not hatred, just a simple statement of fact in his mind. I was a non-factor, a historical footnote, irrelevant. And he was so confident in this assessment, so secure in his position, that he could brag about my powerlessness to another woman. I stood there, the phone a lead weight, the words searing behind my eyes. The hum of the refrigerator was suddenly deafening. The soft glow from the under-cabinet lights felt harsh, clinical, illuminating this new, terrible truth. It wasn't just the affair, though there was a tidal wave of nausea on its own. It was the utter, absolute certainty in that sentence. The casual confidence that he had maneuvered himself into a place where I, the person he'd sworn to protect and cherish, could do him no harm. He'd built walls, secured assets, perhaps even laid legal groundwork, all while wearing the mask of a loving husband. He'd played the long game of betrayal, and he thought he'd won. He thought the castle was impenetrable. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Our life before that moment felt comfortable, stable. We had the house, the careers, the quiet routines. He was successful, climbing the corporate ladder at a pace that impressed even him. I had my own work, my own corner of the world, smaller than his perhaps, but mine. We moved through the days with a practiced ease, a choreography of shared space and separate thoughts. Looking back, there were cracks, hairline fractures I'd ignored or smoothed over. Late nights at the office that became more frequent. A certain detachment in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the gravity between us. I told myself it was stress, ambition, the natural evolution of a long marriage. I was busy too. We were building something, I thought. A future. A life built on shared history, mutual respect, maybe not the fiery passion of the early days, but something deeper, more enduring. A partnership. He was the ambitious one, yes, the one who craved the climb, the view from the top. I supported him, celebrated his wins, listened to his frustrations. I was, in my own quiet way, his foundation, his home base. He worked for a large corporation, a behemoth in its industry. His division was growing, his role becoming more significant. He talked about mergers, acquisitions, internal politics, the endless dance of power and money. I listened, nodding along, offering quiet support. It was his world, complex and distant from mine. I understood the broad strokes, the ambition that drove him, but the intricate details were lost on me. Or so he thought. I heard things, snippets of conversation, frustrations aired over dinner, names dropped, vulnerabilities mentioned. Information I filed away without realizing its potential value. My own background was different. My father built his empire from the ground up, a different industry entirely, but built on the same principles: ruthlessness, foresight, and an almost supernatural ability to see the angles no one else did. Our family name carried weight in certain circles, a quiet power I rarely invoked. I deliberately carved out my own path, wanting my success to be my own, not a reflection of his influence. My husband knew my father was successful, of course. Everyone knew, but he saw it as separate, distant. My father was the old guard, his business a different beast. It posed no threat to his ascent in his world. That, I now understood, was a crucial blind spot. The moment I read that message, the comfortable illusion shattered. The foundation I thought we shared turned to dust beneath my feet. The quiet partnership revealed itself as a carefully constructed stage where only one of us knew the real play. He wasn't just having an affair, he was actively dismantling our life, piece by piece, while assuring his new confidant that I was utterly powerless to stop him, let alone retaliate. The immediate aftermath was a blur of pain and disbelief. I don't remember moving from the kitchen, but I found myself on the sofa, curled into a ball, the phone still clutched in my hand like a lifeline to the wreckage. Tears came, hot and heavy, blurring the words on the screen, but not erasing them from my mind. She can't hurt me now, the sheer arrogance of it. The profound underestimation. I didn't confront him. Not immediately. The shock was too great. My mind couldn't process a verbal confrontation, couldn't formulate sentences through the raw, primal ache in my chest. Instead, I retreated into myself. I watched him move through the house, oblivious. His easy smile, the way he hummed tunelessly while making coffee, the casual kiss he pressed to my forehead before leaving for work. Each action felt like a fresh betrayal, a performance designed to keep me in the dark. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My nights were spent staring at the ceiling, the phrase echoing in the silence. My days were a fog, a performance of normalcy I barely managed. I went to work, I spoke to friends, I smiled, all while feeling like a raw nerve exposed to the harsh air. The pain was a constant companion, a physical weight pressing down on me. I felt humiliated, not just by the affair itself, but by his confidence in my helplessness. He had written me off, deemed me incapable of response, of inflicting any meaningful consequence on his life. He saw me as weak, perhaps naive, easily managed. That perception, more than anything else, fueled a slow, simmering anger beneath the grief. I started small, quietly. I went back through old phone bills, old emails, looking for confirmation for details. It was like peeling back layers of lies, each revelation a fresh wound. I found hotel bookings, dinner reservations, messages that painted a picture of a parallel life he'd been living for months, maybe longer. His mistress wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was a calculated, ongoing deception. And his conversations with her, the ones I glimpsed or inferred, reinforced his belief that he was untouchable. They talked about his career, his future, their future, all built, seemingly, on the ruins of mine. The more I learned, the more the initial heartbreak solidified into something colder, harder. I stopped crying. The tears dried up, replaced by a glacial stillness. I was moving through the world, but I felt detached, observing everything from a distance. My focus narrowed. The pain was still there, a dull throb, but the sharp edges were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. He continued his performance. Sometimes, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, he'd be overly solicitous, bringing home flowers or suggesting a date night. I played along, watching him, analyzing his words, his gestures. He saw my quietness as sadness, perhaps, or resignation. He misinterpreted my stillness as weakness. He was so utterly convinced of his own cleverness, his own secure position. It was almost pitiable if the stakes hadn't been my entire life. He started talking more openly about the divorce. Not with me, but I overheard phone calls, snippets of conversations he thought were private. He was consulting lawyers, discussing strategy. His focus was on minimizing his financial exposure, protecting his assets, ensuring his professional reputation remained untarnished. He was methodical, calculating. He was planning his exit, and he was doing it from a position of perceived strength. The subtext was always the same. I was a hurdle to be cleared, a problem to be managed, but not a threat. She can't hurt me now, the words were unspoken, but they were the foundation of his strategy. The challenges mounted. He began to subtly freeze me out financially, delaying access to joint accounts, questioning expenses. He started laying the groundwork for claiming I was unstable or emotionally volatile, presumably to gain an advantage in custody or financial negotiations later, should it come to that. He was using every tool at his disposal, every loophole he could find, relying on his knowledge of the system and his perceived leverage. He was leveraging his career, his income, his public persona, all the things he believed I couldn't touch. I felt the walls closing in. My initial shock had given way to a clumsy search for information, then to a hardening resolve. But now, facing his calculated moves, I felt a return of the powerlessness. He was so entrenched, so confident. His lawyers were sharp, his knowledge of his industry and his own finances absolute. What could I possibly do against that? He was right, wasn't he? In his world, the world of corporate power and complex finances, I was an outsider. I couldn't hurt him. One evening, he came home particularly smug. He'd had a great day, he said. Closed a big deal. His division was booming. His future was secured. He talked about his boss, his boss's boss, the structure of the company, the key players. He spoke with such casual confidence, so assured of his trajectory. He mentioned the parent company, a massive, almost faceless entity that owned the corporation he worked for. It was too big, too far removed for me to ever understand, he implied. His world was complex, sophisticated. Mine was simpler. That night, the phrase returned, whispering in the dark. She can't hurt me now, but this time, it didn't sound like a statement of fact. It sounded like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. And in that moment, something shifted deep inside me. The last vestiges of pain and humiliation burned away, leaving behind only a cold, clear space. I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like someone who had been handed a problem to solve. A complex puzzle with incredibly high stakes. He thought I was focused on the emotional fallout, perhaps on a messy public divorce. He thought my leverage was limited to half the house and spousal support. He thought my world ended at the edge of our shared life. He was wrong. He had underestimated me. More importantly, he had underestimated my background. He saw my father's success as separate, irrelevant to his own corporate universe. He didn't understand the interconnectedness of power, the way influence could ripple across industries, the way old money and old networks operated. He didn't understand that while I might not have the power to hurt his career, the people I was connected to most certainly did. My turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy or a tearful confrontation. It was quiet, deliberate, like the slow grinding of tectonic plates beneath the surface. I made a decision. I would not just survive. I would not just get out. I would ensure that his arrogant claim, "She can't hurt me now," would become the most profoundly ironic, self-defeating sentence he had ever uttered. I began to use the information I had gathered. Not the emotional stuff, not the details of the affair itself. That was irrelevant to this new game. I focused on the business details I'd absorbed over the years. His company's structure, its vulnerabilities, the key players he admired or disdained, the internal politics he navigated. I remembered the frustrations he'd voiced about the parent company, their distant management, their reliance on outdated systems, the specific executives he felt were holding things back. I compiled this information, carefully, methodically. I cross-referenced it with public knowledge, industry news I started devouring, anything I could find. It was slow, painstaking work, done late at night after he'd gone to bed, oblivious. I built a picture, not of his affair, but of his company, his tower. Then I made a phone call. Not to my father directly, not at first. To a contact, someone I trusted implicitly, someone who understood the intricate dance of high finance and corporate maneuvers. I explained the situation, calmly, clinically. Not the emotional betrayal, but the practical reality. I was entering a divorce, and my husband was leveraging his significant position within a major corporation in a way that felt predatory. I hinted at the information I possessed, not about him personally, but about the company itself, insights gained from years inside his world. The response was immediate and exactly what I needed. My father's network wasn't just about his industry. It was about power, influence, and opportunity wherever it lay. My contact understood the potential value of the information, the potential vulnerability of the husband's parent company. More importantly, they understood that a request originating, however indirectly, from me, from my father's daughter, was not a request to be taken lightly. Things began to move behind the scenes. A quiet investigation, subtle inquiries, due diligence conducted by people I would never meet, in offices I would never see. My role was minimal but crucial, providing context, confirming details, sometimes simply being available to answer cryptic questions. It was like setting a series of complex mechanisms in motion, watching from a distance as the gears began to turn. During this time, my husband remained blissfully unaware. He continued his legal posturing, his casual cruelty, his absolute certainty in his protected status. He pushed harder, making demands, asserting his control. He seemed to be escalating, perhaps trying to force a quick, favorable settlement, convinced I had no recourse. He didn't know the ground beneath his feet was starting to tremble. He saw my quietness as defeat. He saw my lack of public outcry as surrender. He saw my detachment as despair. He talked about his career plans, his future promotions, the new initiatives he was leading. He was building, completely unaware that the structure he relied on was being systematically evaluated, its weaknesses exposed, its future being decided in rooms he would never enter. The crisis deepened when his lawyer sent a particularly aggressive letter. It outlined his proposed settlement terms, which were shockingly unfair, clearly designed to leave me with minimal resources. It also contained thinly veiled threats about contesting my fitness or stability if I didn't comply. It was the clearest indication yet of how completely he had written me off, how certain he was that he held all the cards. The phrase, "she can't hurt me now," wasn't just something he'd bragged about to his mistress. It was the operating principle behind his entire strategy. Reading that letter, the cold resolve I'd cultivated intensified. There was no turning back now. No hope for a graceful exit. This was a fight he had started, a war he had declared, believing he was invincible. I finished compiling the last pieces of information, making sure every detail was accurate, every potential angle explored. I sent the final package to my contact. Then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Days turned into weeks. Life continued, or seemed to. I went through the motions, perfected my mask of quiet resignation. My husband remained buoyant, oblivious. He was hitting his stride, professionally. Every interaction was a performance, a subtle assertion of his dominance, his security. He talked about his company constantly, his pride palpable. I started following financial news more closely, specifically related to his industry and the parent company. I scanned headlines, looking for any hint, any rumor. Nothing. The silence was unnerving. Had it all been for nothing? Had his tower truly been impenetrable? Then, the whispers started. Small, almost imperceptible tremors. An analyst report. A sudden surge in stock activity. A rumor on a financial news site, quickly denied, then resurfacing. My contact sent a brief, non-committal email. Things are progressing towards what? I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I just needed to know the mechanisms were still turning. The tension built, a low hum beneath the surface of my carefully constructed calm. He was still oblivious, still basking in his perceived security. He planned a business trip, a major conference where he was speaking. He was excited, confident. He was at the peak of his ascent, the view from the top looking magnificent. And then it happened. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. I saw it first on a financial news alert on my phone. A headline, stark and unambiguous. My father's company name announces acquisition of husband's parent company name. I read the headline. My heart, which had been a block of ice for months, gave a single, hard jolt. I read the article. It was real. It wasn't a rumor, not a possibility. It was done. Signed. Announced. A multi-billion-dollar deal. A seismic shift in the industry. I sat very still, the phone in my hand again, just like that night in the kitchen. But this time, the feeling wasn't nausea or pain. It was a profound, bone-deep stillness. A quiet shock that quickly morphed into something else. The article went on to describe the strategic reasons for the acquisition, the synergies, the future plans. And deep within the details, there were mentions of restructuring, of new leadership, of bringing in fresh perspective. The language was corporate, dry, but the meaning was clear. Heads would roll. Divisions would be reorganized. The hierarchy would be dismantled and rebuilt. I thought of him. Where was he? At work? In a meeting? Giving a presentation? Was his phone buzzing yet? Had he seen the news? I didn't need to be there to witness it. I could picture it perfectly. The moment the headline flashed across his screen, or someone burst into his office with the news. The instant the ground fell away. The realization that the massive, distant parent company he'd seen as his secure ceiling, his ultimate protection, was now owned by the very force he had so casually dismissed. The family he thought couldn't touch him. The reports I heard later, filtered through mutual acquaintances and industry whispers, filled in the details. He was in a crucial meeting, presenting to senior executives. His phone started ringing, buzzing insistently. People in the room were getting alerts on their own devices, furtively checking screens, faces paling. The news spread through the building like wildfire. He tried to continue, apparently, his voice faltering. The executives in the room, who just moments before had held his future in their hands, were now looking past him, their own positions suddenly precarious. His tower wasn't just shaky, it was collapsing. The parent company, the bedrock of his confidence, was gone. Swallowed whole. By my father's firm. The firm of the family whose daughter, he'd so confidently stated, "Can't hurt me now." He reportedly stopped mid-sentence. The color drained from his face. The blood rushed from his head. He reached out, perhaps for the table, perhaps for support, but found none. And then he collapsed. A physical, undeniable collapse. Right there in the meeting room, at the very moment his professional world imploded. It wasn't a heart attack, I learned later. Just shock. Overwhelming, system-wide shock. The kind that happens when your entire reality is instantly rewritten. He was taken to the hospital, then sent home. Placed on immediate, indefinite leave. His career, the thing he had prioritized above all else, the source of his arrogance and his perceived invulnerability, was over. Not with a whimper, but with a bang. An acquisition. An unexpected, devastating power shift. I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way I might have expected. There was a cold sense of satisfaction. Yes, a grim vindication. His arrogance had been his undoing. His underestimation of me, and by extension, my family's world, had cost him everything he valued. The phrase, "She can't hurt me now," echoed in my mind again, not as a source of pain, but as a bitter punchline. But beneath the satisfaction, there was a profound emptiness. The collapse of his world also marked the definitive end of mine, as I knew it. The marriage, already dead, was now formally buried under the rubble of a corporate takeover. The man I had loved, or thought I had loved, had revealed himself to be a stranger, a calculating opportunist who saw me as an obstacle. And I, in turn, had used a power I rarely acknowledged, a power he never saw coming, to orchestrate his downfall. There were no fireworks, no grand confrontation, just a quiet, devastating shift in the balance of power. He was stripped of the very thing he used as armor, the source of his contemptuous confidence. He thought he was safe behind the walls of his career, his corporate status. He didn't realize those walls were built on land owned by someone else. Someone who listened to his daughter. The divorce proceeded swiftly after that. His position was untenable. His leverage evaporated. The arrogant demands ceased. He was broken, defeated, facing a reality he never imagined. I didn't pursue him further. The acquisition was enough. It had served its purpose. It had proven, irrevocably, that I could, in fact, hurt him. That his carefully constructed immunity was an illusion. Life moved on. The acquisition was a massive story in the business world, analyzed and dissected. My father's name was everywhere. Mine wasn't mentioned, of course. My involvement was a ghost in the machine, a quiet catalyst. And that was fine. My victory wasn't about public recognition. It was about the quiet, cold knowledge that I had not been powerless. That his greatest strength had been leveraged, not against him directly, but against the very structure that supported him. I rebuilt my own life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. The scars remained, reminders of the betrayal and the calculated response it elicited. But I was free. Free from the lies, free from the performance, free from the suffocating weight of his contempt. I learned a harsh lesson about trust, about power, and about the hidden strengths people possess. He thought my strength was tied to him, to our shared life, to the things he could take away. He never understood that my strength, like my father's, lay in connections, in understanding the landscape, and in a quiet, unwavering resolve when pushed too far. He thought he was safe because he was high up in his tower. He didn't realize the foundations weren't his, and that I knew someone who could buy the land right out from under him. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.